In this Tennessee Master row crop video, we'll be discussing 2022 input prices and risk management decisions. I'm Aaron Smith, an associate professor and extension economist in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture. When we look at where we are in terms of commodity prices, we'll start with what the prices that we're facing. We've got some very good, or relative to recent years, good prices at this time of year when we look out to the 2022 crop. However, we do have some challenges, and I think most people are well aware of the rise in input prices. We'll discuss a little bit of that. But I think kind of the 2 points I really want to bring home with this video is the need to be thinking about profit maximizing decisions and not necessarily yield maximizing decisions. And then also to look at being a little bit more aggressive with managing some of our output price risk, particularly during key intervals of the production year than in recent years. Obviously, we are under a different set of circumstances in December of 2021 than we were in December of 2020. So when we look at a couple of measures of kind of inflation, we look at the change in the consumer price index for consumers. And right now, as of November, it was estimated at 6.9% higher than a year ago level. And it's near a multi-decade highs in terms of the increase in general prices. But again, when we look at this maybe doesn't tell the whole story. So we kind of switch it up and look at the producer price index, where it actually points to even higher inflation when we look at 22.8% compared to the same time last year. So we're facing a substantially different input cost structure when we look at planting our primary row crops in Tennessee. So when we look at kind of where prices are as of right now, and a lot can change between now and when we put the 2022 crop into the ground. But in general, land prices and rents are up. Prices for most crop protection products and fertilizers are up substantially. We do have some availability of inputs is a concern right now. There's substantial amounts of demand for these inputs and a limited amount of supply. And there are some reasons that we have seen. Obviously, the transportation and logistical issues that we've all seen on the news plays a role in these increased prices. But again, it's something where we want to make sure that we're trying to secure the inputs necessary for the upcoming crop year. Equipment prices are up substantially. Labor shortages continue to be an issue in agriculture. And then obviously on the trucking and logistical side of things, even moving the commodity to market or getting the inputs to the farm can be a challenge. And so the question on most producers' minds right now is, will prices be cheaper before they are acquired in 2022? So essentially, should I make my purchases now, or should I wait until maybe the prices come down a little bit as we look out towards the planting season? So I want to start with fertilizer. Obviously, this one's been considered and well documented in recent months, the rapid increase in fertilizer prices relative to a year ago. This shows us these 2 charts show some select fertilizer prices from 2019 until 2021, the start of December of 2021. You can see substantial price increases across the board when we're looking at DAP, MAP, potash, urea, UAN, and anhydrous as well. So anywhere between 80% up to 220%. So we've seen doubling, tripling of the prices of fertilizer. And that's still, one of the issues. The other issues is, are you going to be able to secure enough supply? And at what price, or where is this going to end up going? Because for most of these prices, we are maybe starting to see a potential top in this market, but there could also be another leg up. So it is challenging to make decisions as to whether to buy now or to hold off and see where prices go as we head into 2022. There are some signs that we might end up seeing maybe a little bit of a lower price. I'm not suggesting that we will see dramatically lower prices in early 2022. But we have seen, for example, natural gas prices come down, which is a key input into production of nitrogen, where it was up 142% year over year. Now it's up 61%. Now that's going to take some time to filter through the supply chain and manifest itself in potentially cheaper end prices. And there's other issues that obviously play a role in these elevated fertilizer prices. It's not just the input or the price of inputs that go into the fertilizer, the supply disruptions, the issues with China, rolling back some of their exports onto the global market, for a variety of reasons. Namely, they want to reduce some of their emissions as we move towards the Olympic Games in Beijing, and that's had adverse consequences. There has been some tariffs imposed on fertilizer suppliers as well, which does factor into the equation. So it's not one individual thing that has really affected this, but there are some signs that we could potentially see a lower prices as we move into 2022. Whether that occurs in the first quarter or it's not until the second or third, that's, I guess, the main question on a lot of people's minds. Not the only input that's up. Obviously, gasoline and diesel prices up compared to this time last year, 50% for gasoline and 40% for diesel. So again, just substantially increased costs for some of our key inputs. When we look at the producer price index by commodity for chemicals, up 35% compared to last year, but availability of some chemicals is a concern. Particularly some of the ones that we end up getting a lot of the components out of China is a challenge. And then obviously the hurricane season this year did no favors down in New Orleans, both from a production of fertilizer, but also a production of chemicals. So again, securing these inputs are going to be costly, and availability might be an issue for certain crop protection inputs that we need in 2022. And so again, that kind of describes the set of circumstances. Everybody knows prices are up. So the next question is, what can we do about this, right? And when we look at kind of historically what we've been able to do in terms of controlling input prices, you can kind of break it down into three different kind of categories: timing, bulk discounts, and purchase sources. But one of the challenges that we run into under the current environment is a lot of these strategies really don't work well when we have availability issues and rising price environment. Obviously there's very little room to end up negotiating prices. You can do some things with potentially looking at different application timings, but again, you're basically looking at the purchasing now or looking at waiting until you end up needing it in the spring. And you're still subject to availability and making sure that your input supplier can end up doing that. I do think that one of the other ones that is an important consideration right now, I know input suppliers are working hard to make sure they get some supply to their existing customer base. So again, having that relationship with an input supplier, just so that you can see what is the likelihood of getting some of the different inputs that are needed, and making sure that you're kind of securing or at least having an understanding of what is going to be available for the upcoming year. But again, a lot of these aren't going to help reduce input prices or input costs as we look to 2022. So when we look at this, it's not an easy task under the current price environment to reduce input costs, and it's going to require creativity and having multiple things to end up helping to bring down these prices. So the first one is soil testing. You have to know where you're at before you start the production season. So make sure that you have an understanding of what's in the soil by field to make sure that you can make informed decisions as to what you should be applying in terms of nutrients. The other one that is applicable to a lot of Tennessee producers is the potential to secure some alternative nutrient sources. Obviously, with our vibrant poultry and livestock industries, there is potentially the capacity for producers to go out and get some additional nutrients through manure and poultry litter and other sources that might be available in individual locations. Modifying that application timing, what are you going to end up putting down in the fall versus the spring versus in season, kind of penciling that out and looking and saying, okay, well, where can I end up starting at, and where do I need to end up in terms of securing the appropriate nutrients that I can apply at different times during the growth season. Eliminating products that aren't contributing sufficient yield relative to costs. I think that's always a prudent move, and we'll go through a quick example of returns to nitrogen, and you can kind of use a similar framework when you're evaluating other inputs. When we're talking about crop protection, I think one of the key things that I think a lot of producers should really look at doing this winter is to have contingency plans, working with their input supplier or suppliers, to end up taking a look and saying, well, if I can't get these chemicals that I do need, what is my next best alternative? What can I use? How much of a certain chemical am I going to end up needing if I can't get it? What's my next plan? What's my ABC contingency plan if you can't end up getting those inputs that are needed? Obviously, crop rotation is an important component. I'm a big proponent of sticking with a crop rotation that works well for your individual operation, but there will be some consideration to high input costs versus low input cost commodities. The prime example is looking at something, corn, obviously with the higher fertilizer costs, is going to look maybe a little bit less attractive relative to soybeans when you're only considering inputs. Now, when you start considering output prices, I think there's a real valid argument to say that corn might be a beneficial one at this juncture, even under these high input cost scenarios. And then just looking at the profitability comparison and managing that price risk, I think the risk on the output side of things definitely favors corn right now relative to soybeans. Soybeans, a lot of their price direction is going to be contingent on how weather proceeds down in South America, and then also what's going to happen in terms of planted acreage in the US. And so when you combine those two things, I think particularly for the end of 2022 and end of 2021 and into 2022, I think there is more risk in soybean prices than there is in corn. But I do honestly think too that the other one that is important to point out is prices are looking very strong entering that first quarter. And I wouldn't anticipate that to end up necessarily changing. But I do think we do have to consider how we manage that risk, even in a potential bullish or flat output price uh, uh, set of circumstances. Another one I want to touch on real quick is just crop share lease. I think that's one that, it's a difficult conversation to have with landowners, but I think that's something that potentially needs to be had, particularly if you're on a straight 1/4 share or some other share arrangement that doesn't factor in production costs. And then talk a little bit about maximum return to nitrogen. And the key here is to kind of protect that output prices and manage the profit margin as we move into 2022. So this is one example that I just want to put out there. I know everybody's cost of production is going to be different, but one thing that is for sure is I think everybody's is up substantially compared to the 2021 crop. And so when we kind of pencil this out, we've seen rising crop costs across the board. And so, we're close to $1,000 per acre is where we've got some of our budgets, and that's targeting, about 180 bushels per acre. And the question is, are these still rising? And in some circumstances, yes, the fertilizer prices are still going up. Chemical prices are all over the board, but generally they're still trending up. So what we've got just based on these real simple projections is a 944 all-in cost of production. As mentioned, it's going to be different for every different farm. But penciling these out to see where you are in terms of cost of production, I think is very important under the current price circumstances. And then also having a reasonable expectation for revenue. When you look out to, December 2022 corn futures at 550, that's $990 per acre. That hasn't been adjusted for basis, but again, there is still some profit on the table. So, protecting that margin and making sure you're managing output price risk, I think is really important. So when I look at that, one of the ones I always like to do is look at what are some of the viable scenarios. So again, this is using that $944 cost of production per acre. And then you look at what are some of the yield and price outcomes and what is the resulting profitability based on those yield and price outcomes. So when we look at the green box, it goes from 160 to 190 bushels per acre. And then on the price side, we go from 5 1/4 all the way to $6. And you can see there is some black in there. So there's the ability to end up potentially capturing some profit. If we're close to that 180 bushels, then we're getting a price of 550, even under these extremely elevated input cost scenarios. So again, when we're looking at making our decisions, decisions should be made on profitability, not necessarily price, or just yield, right? We want to end up factoring, can we make money off of this? You know, if you have a crop and you're selling it at $5 and $5 a bushel, and your input cost is $4 a bushel, you're still making a profit. Same way if you're selling it at $8 a bushel and your inputs are $7, you're still making that $1 per bushel profit. What you want to avoid is selling at $7 a bushel when it's costing you 8 to end up producing it. So again, understanding where we are in terms of a profitability standpoint, I think is really important in this environment. I mentioned crop share leases. This is just kind of illustrates where we were in 2021 at this time, and then looking out to the 2022 crop. And the one that I want to kind of show on this is how that risk profile has changed dramatically for the producer. So when we look at that increase in expenses last year compared to this year at the same time when we're doing our planning, it's a very different outlook for the producer in terms of who's bearing the risk if you're doing a straight crop share. So if you're doing a 1/4 revenue share with no splitting of the production expenses, that is a lot more risk on the producer than it is on the landowner. And so again, having some conversations with landowners on where or how the risk profile has changed, I think is something that's a very difficult conversation to have, but it's something that I think needs to be articulated. And so when we look at that, the question would then be, okay, is there a way that we can move potentially to a cash arrangement, or end up looking at incorporating potentially a portion of the expenses into the share arrangement? And you know, I think that's one that can be very beneficial to end up having those conversations this winter with landowners. When we look at fertilizer prices, obviously, when we've seen a tripling of fertilizer prices, you know, there's a different amount of fertilizer that potentially would be applied to maximize profitability. This kind of just highlights the difference between 2021 and 2022. If you're looking at where nitrogen prices and where corn prices were at this time last year, you know, in this scenario, the maximum return to nitrogen was 182 pounds of N per acre. This year, with the elevated nitrogen prices and then an elevated corn price, that's actually pulled back a little bit on the amount of nitrogen that would be applied to end up achieving that maximum return. So again, looking at the ratio of prices between nitrogen price and corn price is really important to determine how much you should be applying to those individual fields, and seeing if there is the ability to end up you know, reducing the amount of N that's applied on there that's going to maximize the profit. So in terms of input prices, you know, it is challenging to manage the risk on those. You know, it's one of those ones where a lot of times you've got to pay the amount that the input supplier is requesting. There's not a lot of negotiating when we have supply issues, but there is ways that you can manage risk through output price risk rather than input price risk. So exploring the different tools that are out there that can be utilized to avoid what I would call a catastrophic outcome. And what I mean by that is buying those high input prices and then having corn or soybean prices decline during the season when you've already purchased or applied those inputs. So, you know, one of the ones that I'm a huge proponent of, I think every row cropper needs to get the most out of their crop insurance protection. But you have to remember, we're still a few months out until we end up getting that projected price in the spring. So, you know, one of the strategies that I do want to just kind of point out is maybe a way to end up bridging that risk gap between now and into early March, when we do end up getting, you know, that added or that initial protection from our crop insurance products. So one of the ones that I do, and you could do this using other risk management tools. I want to highlight put options. I think it's an easy one to end up kind of think about conceptually. And I think it's one that, you know, it works well under these circumstances to end up providing some output price risk protection. So Just basics of a put option. It sets a futures price floor. It has a defined loss. You're not subject to margin requirements. It's equal to whatever the premium is for the designated strike price. It allows you to benefit if the futures market continues to strengthen. As I mentioned before, I'm still very optimistic, cautiously, but I am optimistic that we will still have good prices into the first quarter of 2022. But again, we know how quickly things can change, and we are always subject to unforeseen circumstances. But again, it is something where it does allow continued participation in market rallies. It doesn't set the basis, which is a big thing in Tennessee. Obviously, if you can store a commodity or avoid seasonal lows, we have a very strong basis because of our poultry, our ethanol industries, and our distilling industries. That really helps us out in terms of being able to obtain a price premium for our products. And then the other benefit of a put option is there's no requirement for delivery, so it doesn't add to your production risk. So I'm going to go through two real quick examples of how this would work. And again, the way that I would look at this is kind of bridging that risk gap between now and when we have our crop insurance prices set. So this was, as of middle of December 2021 prices for a 2022 put option. But as of December 21st, you could buy a $5 December 2022 put option for 25 cents, and that sets a 4.75 per bushel futures price floor. If December futures contract is above $5, then the option doesn't have any value. And then if it's below 4.75, then it's the 4.75 minus whatever the December futures contract is at. So when we're assuming a projected yield of 180 bushels per acre, you go 180 times 4.75 is $855 per acre, using that same $944 cost of production. That leaves $89 of the value of the inputs unprotected if yield is achieved. And so if we're looking at a 1,000-acre farm, it's 180,000 bushels. The premium would be $45,000 to end up protecting that, and it removes 86% of the downside futures price risk. Now, one where I think this can be really beneficial is just using it as a bridge. There's very few circumstances when I think taking an option all the way out to expiration makes a lot of sense. It can be used as kind of a temporary or a bridge between now and when we have the futures price set. So one of the benefits of doing this just for a 3-month interval is that you can go around and you can exit that option position once you know what your crop insurance price is and recoup a portion of that premium. So you're not maybe out the full 25 cents. You might only be out 20 cents or 5 cents, or it depends on the direction, but it does end up taking the risk off the table for a defined loss. Now, if you're sitting there and say, well, I don't want to put that much money on the table in terms of premium, you can look at a kind of a deeper loss type protection. This is the one where I think the closest parallel that I can use to this would be similar to house insurance, right? You're hoping that you never end up getting in the money with this one, because that means that prices have been maintained above this level. But if we did see a catastrophic event that dropped prices, this would give us some protection. So again, using kind of the same strategy, buy a 4/20 December 2022 put option, 5 cents, sets a 4.15 futures floor. If the December futures contract is above 4.20, which we hope it is, then it doesn't have any value, but it provided some protection between now and when you exit the position. If it does drop below 4.15, then you can end up exercising the option and end up having a gain. And so again, using kind of that same estimation as the last example, so it'd be $747 per acre. And so again, you'd have $197 of a cost of production that is unprotected, again, if yield is achieved. But again, this was a substantially lower premium cost of $9,000, and it does remove 75% of the futures price risk off the table. And so when we look at this, again, what you can do is you could carry this from December 2021 until the end of February or early March, and then exit this position and potentially recoup some of that 5-cent premium once we know what the crop insurance prices are going to end up being for corn. And so again, I think these types of strategies can bridge that risk gap between now and when we get into our crop insurance products. And if things do go down, you could maintain these positions beyond that if it made sense. But what it does is it buys you the time to end up looking at additional risk management options before that crop's in the ground. So just in conclusion on this, between now and planting, nobody knows definitively if input prices will be higher, the same, or lower than current prices. So I think the big one to look at right now is how do we manage that risk? You're not necessarily going to maybe get the highest possible price, but it's about managing that risk and taking some of the adverse potential adverse outcomes off the table by using some of these tools that are available to us. The risk profile has changed dramatically compared to recent years. One of the ones that is challenging to kind of, I guess, go against the recent past, I guess the best way to end up putting it. If you think of the 2021 crop, what we've seen prices actually strengthen pretty much all the way from the spring into harvest. Is it possible that the 2022 crop does that? Sure, it is. We could see prices continue to strengthen. Is it more likely that we might see prices fall off if we have a good production year? Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable outcome. So again, just because we had a recent year where those that marketed all their crop at harvest made out the best doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to occur in 2022. In fact, I think it's pretty unlikely that we will see prices appreciate all the way through into harvest of 2022. But again, the message here is to just manage that risk accordingly based on these higher input prices. Make sure that you don't set up that catastrophic circumstance where you have high input prices and then low output prices. That can be very, very challenging. Bridging the gap until at least crop insurance prices are set, I think is something that producers should consider. And then again, if you are buying inputs right now at this time of year, just protecting the value of that through output price risk management, I think is very important. Inaction is a decision. It usually isn't the correct one. So just evaluating those alternatives that are available to you in terms of managing risk, I think is very important. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if there are any questions, you can feel free to contact me. My information is on the screen, and I hope you'll join us for another video. Thank you.